Hey friends, welcome to the Angie Ambrosetti Show, Let Her Out to Play. I'm Angie, your host, a teenage mom turned multi-six-figure earner, married to the same man for nearly 40 years. I'm a homeschooling mom of 7 and totally unqualified, at least on paper, but wildly called by God. Remember, He doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the called. Here, we are going to talk about it all. Healing from the hard stuff, building a business with heart, raising a big family, walking in faith, and finally breaking free from the lies that said we weren't enough. So if you're ready to stop playing small, shake off the doubt and the shame, and step fully into who you were created to be, girl, you are in the right place. Let's go. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast today. I'm here by myself. You're getting a solo cast of me, and I wanted to come on because I thought it would be really good to kind of tell the whole story of the adoption series. For those of you who don't know, November is National Adoption Month. And because we've adopted 3 children, if you've been following along with the podcast or you know anything about my story, my family, all the things, I thought it would be really great to just go back, kind of start from the beginning of the journey and talk about different things about our adoption story. So here we go. I just figured, you know what? Hey, I'm just going to pop on here and I'm going to share this with them. And so, for those of you who don't know, my husband and I, we have been married for 37 years. And this December, we will be boyfriend and girlfriend for 40 years. And guys, if you think that doesn't sound crazy, even to me, oh my word, it 100% sounds so crazy, but we started our journey very young in life. And let's see, we started on a blind date. We ended up getting pregnant before we were married. Well, when I say we, I mean me, right? And we had our first son, who's now 37 years old. We have had 4 biological children, and we've adopted 3. And so my last 3 podcasts, or I don't know if it was exactly the last 3, but I did interview all 3 of our sons that were adopted. And, you know, for many years, like, we never talked about it because our sons did not know they were adopted until they were 12. 12, 15, and 18, I think, is when we told them they were adopted. We told them they were adopted, and that was for different reasons. And so we didn't talk about it for a long time. And so now that we do talk about it, sometimes it seems a little like, I don't even like to say it. I don't even like to say, you know, oh, these are the adopted kids, because we don't refer to them in that way at all. They are our children. You know, our names are on their birth certificate. We love them. We would lay down our life for them just as any adoptive parents would. And so it's kind of interesting now to hear people say, "Oh, is this one of your adopted kids?" Like, I don't even, honestly, like, I don't even like that scenario because I don't want to differentiate between them. But since we are focusing on adoption, this series, because it is National Adoption Month, you know, it's something to talk about. And so in the beginning, whenever my husband and I, not necessarily the beginning of our journey together, but after we had had our 4 biological children, my husband had a vasectomy because we thought we were done. You know, we weren't going to have any more kids. And even back then, it was like, oh, you have 4 kids. Wow, that's a lot. Like, how do you do that? And, you know, people say things, you just hear things. I probably have said the same thing to people in the past. I don't know. Sometimes we actually say things before we think about them. And so, yeah, you know, it is what it is that happens. But we thought we were done having children. And so, like I said, my husband had a vasectomy. And several years later, I think our youngest son at the time was maybe 5. And we really felt the Lord calling us that we needed to expand our family. We didn't really know what that looked like because he had had a vasectomy. Reversals were very expensive. And at the time, like, we couldn't even fathom the idea of having a reversal because that was so much money. Um, and so we just began to pray, and we actually were praying the prayer of Jabez. I don't know if you've ever heard that, but basically he's asking the Lord to expand his territory. And so we began to pray that and just ask the Lord, what does this mean? Because we really felt like the Lord had laid it on our hearts that our family needed to expand. And I can just remember thinking, what in the world is that going to look like? Like, God is going to have to really provide financially. Adoption was not even on our radar. It was not on our radar. And so the Lord put some people in our path, as He always does. Like, I didn't know anyone who had had a vasectomy. Maybe that's not something that people talk about, right? I didn't know anyone who'd had a vasectomy. Like, at the time, or anyone that had had a reversal, or I don't even know that I knew people who really had adopted children. But it's almost like when I started homeschooling, I didn't really know a lot of people who homeschooled, but now my entire circle is homeschoolers, right? And so it's just one of those things where, we started praying, we started asking the Lord, what do you want for us? We feel like you've really laid this on our heart. And so as we began to pray that prayer, the Lord did start to expand our territory. And He actually put us in the path of a Christian physician who does vasectomy reversals as a ministry. And so where we were looking at, we actually did go talk to a doctor locally, and it was like $12,000 to have a reversal. And we didn't have insurance, and insurance didn't even pay for that. Like, that would have had to have been a cash deal. And so we were like, well, we can't do that. I mean, we're talking about 20 something years ago. Like, we could not afford that. And so that we felt like that door closed. We continued to pray and ask the Lord what He had in mind for us. And again, adoption was not even on our radar. And so the Lord put us in the path of this. I don't even remember who, but the Lord put us in the path of this doctor. I remember who the doctor was. He didn't live in our state, but again, it was a ministry to him. And it was like, I don't know, $2,000 maybe. I really do not remember the cost, but we communicated with this doctor. Guys, you're like, this story is crazy. We talked with him. We went to, I think it was Arkansas. We went to his home. They put us up in their home. Literally. This was another homeschooling family. And I believe they had adopted children. But again, adoption still was not on our radar at this time. My husband had his reversal. It was within our budget for that. And he actually had to go back a second time for a second reversal. He's going to love that I'm sharing this on the podcast, right? But I'm just being vulnerable. I'm just like telling you the truth. Okay. And we got to become friends with this doctor and his family, his wife and everything. And a couple years passed and I still did not get pregnant. Now, we thought that we would get pregnant right away because we had had 4 children every 2 years back to back. And honestly, I was taking birth control with all of those. Like, I might have missed some here and there or whatever, but we never were trying to get pregnant. And especially the first time around, I was definitely consistent on my birth control pills back in those days. But we just, we were like, okay, Lord, we don't understand because we really felt you calling us to expand our family. It's been a couple years. I haven't gotten pregnant. What in the world? And I had someone say to me, have you ever considered adoption? And I was like, nope, nope, I've never considered adoption actually. And I said these words. I don't know if I could love a child that I didn't give birth to the same as I would a child that I actually birthed, that I carried in my womb, and that I nursed. Because when I nursed my other 4 children, it created such a bond, and it's all that I knew, right? That is all that I knew. And so looking back, like, it's part of my story. That's what I said. We can't change those things, right? But someone, again, the Lord expanded my territory, and someone said to me at the time, I was working in a different business and I was in someone's home who had adopted a lot of children. And this conversation, like, I never brought it up. But here's what she said to me. Well, we've adopted, I think they had adopted 4 children. And she said, I actually nursed 2 of them. Mind blown. I was like, what? Could you please repeat what you just said? And she said, yeah, it's a thing. Like adoptive moms can nurse their babies. And I was like, that's crazy. Like I've never even. And so those things started twirling in my mind, right? Like it was my my territory, my brain, my heart, all these things started expanding, and the Lord was doing exactly what I'd asked him to do, was to expand my territory, not necessarily expand my family, not necessarily expand my mindset. It was all the things that I didn't even understand, I didn't even realize. And it was about a year later that a sweet friend of mine called me up. It was in October of this year. I'm not going to try to remember the years because I get super confused, especially when I'm on a podcast trying to figure out dates. And she said, hey, this distant relative of mine, they have this little boy, and the mom is not doing so well. She's addicted, and like they really need prayer. Would you please pray for this little boy? And so, of course, we started praying for this little boy. We didn't know him, didn't live in our state. I don't even think I remember knowing what his name was at the time. And so we started praying. And December 26th of that very same year, my friend called me again and she said, hey, I know you guys have been wanting to expand your family. She was a close friend, and so she did know those details. And she said, you know, that little boy that you've been praying for our distant family? And I said, yes. And she said, they need a family to adopt him. He needs adopted. And I just want to let you know that I gave him your name in hopes that like this might be a thing, this might work out. Without hesitation, without even thinking, I was like, okay, no problem. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my mom and her husband and my husband. And when I hung up and told my husband about it, he was like, let's do it. Yes, yes, yes. We didn't even hesitate. And again, we had not been talking about adoption. We had not talked about it. And so in January, right after that, we actually got this sweet little boy that I interviewed about 4 weeks ago on the podcast named Braydon. He was almost 2 years old at the time. And so we brought him into our home. He was such a gift, such a blessing, and still is to this day. He's getting ready to turn 24, which seems so crazy to even think about. And yeah, all of a sudden, our family was expanding. We didn't know anything different. We brought him into our home. Our other children just embraced him, you know, just the same as they would a brand new baby that I had given birth to. And so we ended up having a home study because, you know, in the states that you live in, there's all kinds of different regulations that you have to go by with adoption. And so we had the state brought someone into our home to make sure that we were fit and make sure that everything was safe and all the things. And so I became friends with her. And, you know, another almost not even a year. I think, you know, the time frame, I don't remember at all. It's kind of a blur. But several months later, she called us back and she said, hey, there's a situation. There's a mom who's expecting a baby. He's due in about 3 months and he needs a home. Do you know anybody who might be interested in adoption? And I said, of course, we would be interested. Now, granted, you have to know my husband, like, he pretty much goes along with anything that I feel a passion for. And we were so thrilled when we got our first little guy that when I called him that day and said, hey, we got another call. They want us to adopt this baby. It's a brand new baby. It's a little boy. He's not even born yet. It's about 3 months. And he's like, yes, yes. Like we've been praying that God would expand our family. Let's go for it. And so I remember hanging up the phone and immediately it was on my heart what my friend had said to me a few years back. I nursed two of my adopted children. And so I started researching. I started contacting people that I knew. I don't even remember if I went back to that same friend or not, but I remember that I started searching it out and I was like, if this can be done, Lord willing, I'm going to do it. And so this might be a little bit graphic for some, but hey, I'm assuming that adults are listening here, right? So I began the journey to prepare my body to nurse this newborn baby. Now, granted, I had 3 months. And so I contacted my local hospital and talked with the lactation consultants there. And they were a little familiar with it, but they were like, most people do not do this. Like, are you kidding? Like, we want to work with you. We want to help you do this. So I was able to rent double breast pumps from the hospital. And honestly, I had to use those breast pumps around the clock every 3 hours, around the clock. I contacted a friend of mine who was a doctor, and she already knew that I like to do all things natural and healthy. So I set up an appointment with her. I went in, I talked to her, I told her what my thoughts were, what I had, my dreams of being able to nurse this brand new adoptive baby. And she was like, girl, let's do it. I had researched some different compounding, natural supplementation that you could take that would help induce lactation, and you guessed it. I had it compounded. I started taking that. I started pumping every 3 hours around the clock, knowing, hey, I've got 3 months, right? Well, guess what? That little stinker, he came 6 weeks early. But still, I had some time in between there. I remember being at baseball games and having to go to the car because I had to pump. I had to do it. Like, yeah, I just put blankets up over the windows so that nobody could see in. I was determined that I was going to be able to do this for our new baby that was coming. And so I did that. Again, he was born 6 weeks early. And so we got the call that the baby had been born. That was on a Wednesday. And on Friday morning, we were supposed to show up on Friday to pick up the baby. He was a preemie, but things were stable. And so he was going to be able to come home with us that Friday. And so I was in the shower. I was so excited. And I had, been pumping. I was prepared. I actually had been storing the milk. And so I was ready to go. And my phone rang as soon as I got out of the shower. And it was the agency who had contacted us about this new baby. And she said, well, I hate to tell you this, but the mom has changed her mind. And she's decided that she's going to keep the baby. And so, as you can imagine, my heart sank. There were a lot of tears shed. A lot of tears were shed. And I was like, Lord, what in the world? Like, you've been putting this on our hearts. And we really felt like this was the next thing. And the mom has changed her mind, the birth mom. And honestly, guys, I cried all weekend. I cried all weekend. But at the same time, I knew that God had a plan. And maybe what I thought the best plan wasn't his best plan. Sometimes that happens, right? Like, sometimes that happens. And this story does have a good ending, but it was a really long weekend. And so on Monday, they called back and they said, well, the birth mom, she does want you to have the baby. She's not going to be able to take the baby home with her because, like I said, she was addicted. And, the baby's going to have to go into foster care and the mom's going to have to get clean. And once she does that, then she'll be able to take her baby. But she's decided that she doesn't want to do that. She doesn't want to. She wants you to go ahead and come and get the baby. And so, whereas my heart goes out to that birth mom, and I'm so thankful for her, my heart was broken over the weekend just because not knowing. And so the next day, we were able to go and pick up our sweet little guy. And that's Elijah, who is now 20 years old.
and Elijah was addicted to cocaine. And I just want to be clear with you, those first 3 months were very difficult because helping a newborn preemie, he was a preemie. He weighed like 5 pounds, 2 ounces, I think, and it was difficult those first 3 months. And I tell this story a lot in that there were just so many nights, night after night after night, I would sit in the nursery and I would rock that baby and I would just pray and I would sing and I would just, ask the Lord, God, please help him to have some peace because he's obviously having a very difficult time. And I had a supportive husband. Financially, we were okay. We had a beautiful home. I had a lot of support from my mom, my mother in law, my children. My daughter was like a second mommy to these babies. And it was still a very difficult time helping a newborn preemie who's addicted to cocaine. Lots of nights I thought, you know, I thought about moms out there who are young, who are addicted, who don't have a husband, who don't have a support system, who don't have a financial stability, and having a crying baby for 3 months would be a very stressful situation. And I was yet so blessed to have those things. And, being able to nurse him was such a gift. Now, it didn't give him full supply. Obviously, my body had not delivered a baby, so I didn't have the milk supply that I had with my other 4 children, but it was enough to give him some comfort and to create a bond between us. He was allergic to, most formulas, and so we actually had to use goat milk with him. We got some clean goat milk, and that helped sustain him, and then the nursing was such a gift. I thought it was gonna be for me, the gift of the bond, but I believe with all of my heart that the gift was to him because it helped comfort him and give him some relief. And I am so grateful for that. And it was, about 3 months in that finally those effects started wearing off and he was able to be more comforted much easier. But I was able to continue nursing him for about 4 months, and so that was such a beautiful blessing to be able to do that, and he continued to grow, and about a year and a half, again, time frame not sure, year and a half, 2 years, I guess, later, we got, well, actually, wait a minute, let me back up for just a second. About, 6 months later, we got another call, and they said, "Same birth mom, she's pregnant again." And she's having a girl this time, and she wants you to adopt this little girl. And we were like, "Yes," because those of you who know my story, we have all boys and only one girl. And so, yes, we were all in for that. And as time went on, she got clean and she delivered her baby. Praise the Lord. She got herself clean and she kept her little girl. And so I'm thankful for that for her and for her daughter. And then, again, time framing here, another year or so later, they called again, same birth mom. She's having another baby and she wants the boys to be together. Would you be willing to take this next little baby? Of course, we said yes, and when I say we, I mean me, because I just knew this was the thing, and so I said yes, told my husband, he's like, "Let's do it." That's always his answer pretty much is when he knows it's a calling for us, he's like, "Let's do it." And so, yeah, again, we ended up getting this next little guy. Now we have 2 little boys, biological brothers, such a beautiful gift. And before he was born, now he didn't come early, but we knew about the time frame. And so I again began preparing my body with this natural compounded supplement and the pumping around the clock every 3 hours. And so we got our next little guy, which was Ian. And Ian was addicted to marijuana when he was born. And so he slept all the time. I mean, he didn't cry all the time, right? Because 2 different drugs like cocaine, he cried all the time, marijuana, he slept all the time. So we had a hard time kind of keeping him awake. But again, the comfort of being able to nurse him and give him that little bit of something that I could give him as his mom was such a blessing. And he was, like I said, he wasn't born early. He wasn't a preemie. I think he was like in the 6 something range. I can't remember exactly. But having to keep him awake was a little bit more of a challenge. But he began to thrive and was able to nurse for, 4 to 5 months as well. And it, again, like just such a blessing to be able to have that bonding that I had with the 2 youngest. And they needed it so much. And I really think they needed it as much as I needed it. And going back to what I said in the beginning before we ever even looked into adoption of, how could I love a child I didn't give birth to? And that's just like, you just don't know what you don't know. And that just went out the window so fast. I don't even think about that, except for like when I say it now, because I just want to give people the honest, raw truth is that it's not like I woke up one day and I was like, oh, I want to adopt children. That just was never on my radar. But when the Lord puts it on your heart and you start praying to expand your territory, whatever that looks like, He is so amazing to do that. And I recently heard someone talk about the prayer of Jabez, and they were talking about it in a different light with something different, not about adoption, not about expanding their family or anything like that. And it reminded me that we did the same thing, that we heard that prayer of Jabez and we started praying it. So I want to encourage you that I would be praying, like whatever it is in your life that you feel like the Lord is calling you to, ask the Lord to expand your territory and for Him to bless it however He chooses. And so now our children that, that we adopted are 17, 20, and 23. They're all about ready to have birthdays. So I kind of have to keep it in my mind to just remember. But it's been the biggest blessing in our life. And for my husband and I, like knowing that we, we actually chose them and the Lord chose us for them. And so, if you haven't listened to the podcast recordings that I've done with each one of them, I would encourage you to go back and do it because it's interesting to hear their perspective. And I fully intend to interview my 4 adult children because I would love for you to hear what their perspective has been on bringing these beautiful young souls into our lives and expanding our family in such a way. And they all just love them so much that there's never been any kind of difference or any kind of like barrier or separation. Like they were all in with it. And even to this day, like they love them so much. They spend so much time together. And I love that. I love that our family has been expanded in that way. And it's just I really feel like it's a beautiful picture of how Christ adopts us into his family. Like we were astray and then he brings us in and there's no differentiation. Like he loves us unconditionally and just keeps, disciplining us as we discipline our adopted children the same as we did the others. Although I will say this, my adult children, they always say the younger 3, they're so spoiled. They're so spoiled. You give them everything and they, financially we're in a different spot now than we were when we started having babies at 19 years old, obviously. And we always say that the younger 3, they've worn us down a little bit. We're in our 50s. It's a lot different, when you bring a baby home when you're 40 years old. Because I was 40 years old when we brought Ian home from the hospital. And that was 17 years ago. So thinking back to being 19 and then being 40, I might have been worn down just a little bit, but there's such a blessing. And I would just encourage people, any of you listening, if you feel the Lord calling adoption in your life, I would totally just pray and ask the Lord to expand that because he can do it in such a way that it just like all the pieces fit together so beautifully. And I don't know, I just want to encourage you in that. And I honestly believe that my children probably um they might actually adopt children. And so then I'll have grandbabies that are adopted. I don't know, but we'll just see what the Lord does in that. And so, this month being National Adoption Month, my heart is just so passionate for that. And recently, my husband and I, and we took our three sons, our three youngest sons, we took our daughter-in-law, we took them to a banquet. It's called Choices, and it is for women in crisis and pregnancy. And I'd gone to it in the past, and I took them this year. We all went together, and just to hear different adoption stories, to hear stories of women who thought they were going to give their baby up um, to abortion, and they were able to find hope and support and strength and to not do that, but to either one, place their babies in adoption care or get their lives straightened around and have the support they need to be able to keep their baby. It was really such a blessing. And that is where my heart lies for my financial support. I love supporting ministries like that, and just to encourage young teenage moms, because again, I was a teenage mom. I could have made a different decision back then when I was 19 years old, and the Lord helped me make the decision. I'm going to keep my baby. My husband and I are going to get married, and here we are. And if you've listened to any of the other episodes on the podcast, I've interviewed women as young as age 13 who got pregnant and had their babies and kept their babies. And specifically, one woman that I interviewed, she was the youngest. She was 13 years old, and she and her baby daddy got married when she was 16. So she's still with the same man who was the father of that 13-year-old baby. And it's just such a beautiful picture, and I love it. So I don't know how much longer the series is going to go on. I have some other people in mind that I want to talk to. If you know someone who has an amazing adoption story and you'd like to send them my way, please do that, because I want to help women share their story, get their story out, because it might not be my story that moves 100,000 people, but it might be someone else's story that moves someone else to where they're not afraid to share their story. They're not afraid to talk about getting pregnant as a teenager, or adopting children, or even placing their baby in adoption homes, because that is a beautiful thing. So anyways, I hope you were encouraged by this today. And as always, please, please give me a 5-star rating. Leave a written review. If you have questions or you want to suggest topics for the podcast that you'd like to hear, I would love to hear that. So thanks again for listening to my story. And I got a little bit vulnerable there, but it touched my heart, just reminding me of those days that we went through in the early days of our adoption story with our babies. So our young men now, right? Okay. So thank you so much, guys. I look forward to seeing you on the next podcast. Thanks so much. Bye.
That's it for today, friends. Thanks for tuning in with me today. I hope today's episode stirred your soul, sparked your faith, and reminded you that your story is far from over. Keep walking in freedom. Keep showing up bold, and never forget, God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. Be sure to leave a review, subscribe, or share this podcast with a friend who needs to hear it as well. Until next time, keep letting her out to play, because the world needs your fire.